Hey guys, it's JC Theater Yu-Gi-Oh! Here today, and I'm coming at you with another segment of, I guess, my little series of decks that should never really be made in 2019. And by that, I mean I'm coming at you today with a Koa'ki Meiru Rock Stun deck profile for you. Now, not only did I probably get that pronunciation wrong, but also the ratios in here are a little funky, but please bear with me. I'm going to kind of try to explain my reasoning behind the cards I chose in this deck. I didn't specifically tailor it to meta per se, but I did keep in mind that all the decks that this deck is going to face are going to be other decks in 2019. So you'll see some strategies I try to implement in order to make this as viable as possible in the TCG now, as opposed to years ago when this deck actually kinda was relevant or at least playable. So without further ado, here is my Koa'ki Meiru Rock Stun deck profile. So I play 2 Sandman, 2 Wall, 2 Guardian, and 2 Overload. I know it's a little funky, and personally I hate playing ratios of 2 sometimes, but in this deck it just kind of works because you want to see at least one of them, and you also don't mind seeing more of them. It just works out best. Each of these, I have them all on the screen at once because each of them have the same effect where during your end phase you have to reveal a rock type monster in your hand or iron core in your hand in order to keep them on the field, because if you can't do that, they're destroyed. Additionally, they each contribute themselves as a quick effect in order to negate a certain card activation by your opponent. Sandman negates trap effects. Wall negates spell effects. Koa'ki Meiru negates monster effects. And then Overload negates summons. Ultimately, these are very good, and the whole point of this Rock Stun strategy is to get these guys out, tribute them in order to use their effects to negate certain types of cards, and then I play a lot of cards that special summon from the graveyard. So what you do is you just use their effects to tribute themselves to do that, and then you keep special summoning them back out from the graveyard in order to gain advantage and keep denying your opponent from really playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Hence the stun aspect of the deck. Next up, for even more stunny goodness, we are playing the 2 Barrier Statue of the Drought. No monsters can be special summoned except for Earth monsters, so this is definitely good because we are playing just Earth monsters in this deck. I will give you a spoiler alert about the spells and traps in this deck, that I am not playing Pot of Extravagance because I do not have any copies of Pot of Extravagance. If I did, I would highly recommend it for this deck, and you would get rid of the barrier statues for it. Next up, I do play 3 Block Golem. Block Golem is interesting because if you only have Earth monsters in your graveyard, so he kind of limits the deck, but you don't really go into the extra deck much, and the main deck is just Earth monsters. Now, if all monsters in your graveyard are Earth, you can tribute Block Golem in order to target 2 level 4 or lower rock type monsters in your graveyard, except a copy of Block Golem, and special summon those targets, but their effects that activate on the field cannot be activated that turn. So what you do is you summon Block Golem, tribute him in order to special summon out 2 of your Koa'ki Meirus, and then you wait until your opponent's turn, and then your Koa'ki Meirus can activate their effects on your opponent's turn to stop them from playing during their turn. The only drawback, of course, is that you can't activate their effects on your own turn when you use this, but they still are quick effects, so they can go off that next turn. Finally, for extra stunny goodness, we have 3 copies of the spirit monster Amano Iwado. He cannot be special summoned, but monsters cannot activate their effects except spirit monsters. And then once per turn during the end phase, since he is a spirit, if he was normal summoned or flip face up, he returns to your hand. So basically, he's a blanket negator of monster effects because they can't activate their effects on the field. So what you would do is you would summon him out and then have him on the field during your turn, so that way your opponent can't activate any like hand traps or anything like that because they can't activate monster effects. Lastly, I do play the 1 Glow Up Bulb. The extra deck really isn't important, and this would be the 3rd card you would cut for a 3rd Pot of Extravagance. But since we are playing a little bit of an extra deck, this is used to go into Naturia Beast, since we are playing a lot of level 4 Earth monsters. And then this, if it's in the graveyard, you can send a card from the top of your deck to the graveyard in order to special summon it back out onto your field. So that's just a bigger chance of getting a Koa'ki Meiru in the graveyard in order to special summon it back out from the graveyard. Now onto the spells and traps. For a little bit of draw power, it's card destruction, so that way you can send your Koa'ki Meirus to the graveyard, so that way you can special summon them out from the graveyard, and also it lets you dig deeper into the deck. Same reasoning for Foolish Burial in terms of just getting Koa'ki Meirus to the graveyard. And then another thing I have is some searching with 3 Diamond Core of Koa'ki Meiru. This is also why I like playing the ratios of 2, because this lets you search out any specific one that you would like to see, just in case you notice your opponent using a lot more spells or monster effects or even traps or something like that. You can kind of tailor it and search whichever one you think is necessary. For some recursion, for spell cards anyway, I'm playing, of course, the 1 OG Monster Reborn. And then another interesting little card that recently came out, I'm playing 1 Water of Life. Now, Water of Life is interesting. It's basically a Monster Reborn, but then after you use it, you can't activate any more monster effects that turn except the monster effect of the monster you special summon with this. Additionally, you can't control any monsters on the field, but basically what this does is you can use this in order to bring out a Koa'ki Meiru from your graveyard, so that way on your opponent's turn, you can actually do things, or if you want to use that specific Koa'ki Meiru that turn. But the point is, you can use this and then you can summon out another Koa'ki Meiru, so that way on your opponent's turn you have 2 on the field that can negate things. Another pseudo draw engine kind of thing I'm playing is 3 Magic Planter, and you'll see when we get into the traps, we do have quite a few continuous trap cards. Additionally, I think a really good playmaker of this deck is Ties of the Brethren. So it basically kind of stalls your own turn a little bit because you can't special summon other than from this card for the rest of that turn, and you can't conduct your battle phase. But what it does is you pick one of your many level 4 rock monsters and bring out 2 more from your deck. I think it's an interesting thing that Amano Iwado cannot be special summoned by Ties, but if you normal summon Amano Iwado, you can select it and special summon 2 of your Koa'ki Meirus onto the field. So even though he can't be special summoned, he can be the card you choose, which I thought was just interesting because that just leads to more interactions and stuff and just helps out the deck in general, since we are playing a lot of the same level 4 Earth rock monsters. Next up for the traps, I'm playing 2 Core Blast. This is a very watered down version of Evenly Matched in a way. You can only activate his effect while you control a face-up Koa'ki Meiru monster, and once per turn during your standby phase, if your opponent controls more monsters than you do, you can destroy a number of cards your opponent controls so that your opponent will control the same number of cards as you control monsters. Since this deck does have potential swarming capability with Ties, but for the most part, honestly, this deck will only have a few monsters on the field. So if you have 1 or 2 monsters on the field, or even just in the perfect scenario, 1 Koa'ki Meiru monster, you can destroy during your standby phase everything your opponent controls except 1 or 2 cards, depending on how many Koa'ki Meirus you have on the field. This is definitely good, and additionally, it is a continuous trap, so that definitely helps, because if it ever becomes not useful anymore, you can always use your Magic Planter to get rid of it and draw 2 cards. Next up, we play 3 of another continuous Koa'ki Meiru card, which is Core Reinforcement. Basically, it's a Call of the Haunted with a little bit of a drawback, where if your Koa'ki Meiru special summoned by Core Reinforcement is destroyed during the end phase, you take damage equal to that monster's attack, but for the most part, it'll be tributing itself for its effects, so you don't really have to worry about that. Just always keep in mind with this deck, you have to have a rock monster in your hand in order to pay that cost, but since you only reveal it, you can have 5 Koa'ki Meirus on the field. As long as you have 1 rock monster, you can reveal that same rock monster for all of them, so as long as you have 1. But Core Reinforcement, just like I said, special summons from the graveyard, and you can do it during your opponent's turn. I know it's a little slower because it's a trap, but it isn't the end of the world. And additionally, Magic Planter can get rid of it to let you draw, or you can just tribute your monster. The point is, the backlash of this card, other than it only being able to be used on Koa'ki Meirus, isn't too bad, because the backlash is supposed to be you get dealt damage, but we can mitigate that a little bit. Additionally, this is a copy of a card, like I said, which is the original Call of the Haunted. I don't think this needs any analysis or anything, but the point is, it's just, again, a trap form of special summoning from the graveyard to further plays. Finally, since I am running Magic Planter, and since we are running a bunch of rock earth monsters, I just decided to go the even more stunning route of 2 Gozen Match and 2 Rivalry of Warlords. Like I said, you can cut the glow-up bulb, and you can also cut the 2 Barrier Statue of the Drought in order to add 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance if you have them or if you can afford them. But I only do have 2 recommendations for the extra deck to go into. One, if you're keeping the glow-up bulb, of course, Naturia Beast, to negate your opponent from using spells by sending the top card of your deck to the graveyard. And then additionally, something I thought was kind of interesting, number 55, Go 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 Goliath. He takes 2 level 4 monsters. Additionally, he's Earth Rock. And all monsters you control gain 800 defense, which doesn't really matter, but you can detach an Xyz material from him and target 1 level 4 Earth Rock type monster from your graveyard, and you add that target to your hand. So you can get more recursion just in case you don't draw any of your special summon from the graveyard cards or anything like that. I will also say Block Golem is quite a power play, I guess, in this deck. I know it's kind of not very accurate to say anything in this deck is a power play, but Block Golem is important in the deck. So I highly recommend that if you are playing an extra deck variant and you go into the extra deck, to focus on using exclusively Earth monsters. Or if you decide to go all out with that and do whatever extra deck monsters you think are the best, consider cutting Block Golem so that way he doesn't become a dead card in your hand. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I know this deck is very wonky, but I just wanted to see if I could make Koa'ki Meiru at least playable. And with this strategy of kind of just summoning them slowly and then special summoning them back out from the graveyard, I think it's kind of a way to make them at least somewhat playable. That was my only goal, and I think I succeeded in making this playable. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I'm JC Theater Yu-Gi-Oh! See ya.